No, I'm not growing a Viking beard. I've just had a long week. The Girl Who Died. I was a little bit nervous going into this one due to the period setting because historical set ones tend to not be my favorites, but this was pretty good. I mean, elephant in the room, before I get into spoilers, it is not as good as the last two stories of this series have been, but it is still pretty good. See, what bugs me about most of the historical set episodes is they tend to either get really bogged down in a specific historical figure who may or may not be played as a caricature, or the approach that they take to the alien aspect gets real old real quick with things like, say, Vampire in London or The Black Spot or even Hyde, with things like, ooh, it's vampires, it's a siren, it's ghosts, but what is it really? Well, we know what it is really. This is Doctor Who, it's aliens. So I like that this episode nips a lot of that in the bud by setting it in Viking times. We're not dealing with any specific famous historical figure, and we are right off the bat not dealing with any alien that's trying to pass itself off as a piece of mythology. I mean, we are, the guy claims to be Odin, but we know immediately, like, well, duh, that's an alien just projecting his face in the cloud. So it sort of takes the curse off the normal stumbling blocks that these episodes tend to have for me. And I like the tone of it. This is a more lighthearted episode. And I think it's important for Doctor Who to have more lighthearted episodes. Things can get iffy when it devolves into outright comedy, and then we can end up with stuff like Love and Monsters. But a light tone with a sense of fun, this really has that going. I mean, the consequence of that is it does not feel as substantial as the last two stories that we've gotten. But not everything should be that heavy. We should have a palate cleanser every now and then. In a lot of ways, this feels like that. And it's funny with good Doctor Who, when I get wrapped up in it, that I tend to forget stuff that I already knew going in. Like it happened last season with Dark Water. I forgot that Cybermen were showing up. I mean, that had been part of the early trailers way before the series started, and we hadn't seen them yet. I should have known they were coming, but I forgot when they showed up. I was surprised, and it was awesome. This one, for some reason, I forgot the title, The Girl Who Died. So when she keeled over dead, I was like, oh! But that's a sign of really good storytelling. It makes you forget the stuff that maybe you already knew because you're just wrapped up in it. I really like that we finally got a tie into an explanation as to the Doctor's face and why he looks like Caecilius. And I like that it's not like some deep, hugely profound, oh, this changes everything revelation, but it's like, it's simple. It's like, this is a reminder to yourself. You're not just there to stop the bad things from happening. You're there to save people. That is sort of a reminder to himself. It's small. It's subtle. It borrows a moment of Donna, who's my favorite companion, so that didn't hurt either. It was nice. I like the answer that we got. I like the way that we got it. It was a good moment. If I'm gonna lay any criticisms at this thing, it's gonna be two things basically. The first is, it just seemed to happen more often. I had a hard time understanding what the Doctor and Clara were saying at times. And this isn't the first time that's happened, but it seemed like it happened more often in this episode than is normal. The other thing is sort of the end resolution with Maisie Williams' character, who I did like and was fine. I think it got hyped up a little more than it was worth because, Maisie Williams, Game of Thrones, and she's awesome on that, and I love her on that. But I mean, this part was, at least as it appeared in this episode, it wasn't like, Maisie Williams. It was, that was a nice part. She was good for it. We'll see what happens later, and we'll get to that in a second. But the whole moment that he takes with she's a hybrid, and that calling back to the notion of a prophecy that was mentioned in the first story, I think it was The Witch's Familiar specifically that they brought it up. And I actually didn't talk about that getting mentioned in that episode because I chose to ignore it. I really, really hate prophecies as a storytelling device. They're lazy. They're a cheap shortcut, and I really just don't like them. And if this does feed back into that, I don't like it because, hybrid is such a vague term. It could mean any number of things. I mean, we have seen multitudes of creatures throughout the history of the show that all qualify as hybrid. I would think that the human hybrid Daleks from Daleks in Manhattan would be a much better fit for calling something a hybrid. Just this girl's got a tiny bit of alien tech in her head? I mean, come on. That sort of thing is a dime a dozen in the Doctor Who universe to imply that, she fits this prophecy with something that does not feel like it's that uncommon in this universe. I don't like that. As far as where things will go and how it'll pan out next episode, I'm not sure. I will say I do like that this wasn't really a two-parter. It told a complete story, but it left a strand for us to pick up and run with later. And I kind of like that. Overall, I did like this episode, despite my little nitpicky things. There were a lot of individual moments that I liked, mostly, lighter, brevity-based moments. I really liked that when the Doctor finally came up with his plan and he's telling them, how to set up and how to go about things. He's basically describing his own philosophy of life. Winning is looking happier than the other guy. Keep talking, act like you already know their plan, and sometimes when you're lucky, they will tell it to you. It's like, well, that's just how you go about your life. I like him just saying it out loud. It was fun, it was funny, it was off the cuff for him, and which just felt right, felt appropriate. And there's a lot of little moments like that sprinkled throughout this episode. It's light, it's breezy, it's fun. So what were your thoughts on The Girl Who Died? And what are your thoughts on the hybrid prophecy things? Do you think it will actually turn out to be her? Because if we resolve her story at the end of the next episode, that seems pretty early to resolve something that felt like a seed being planted for later. Oh, and I want to mention something else, just to see if this pans out. I want it on record. Is anyone else noticing a sort of a theme of stories and storytelling? Something just rang about that with me. I mean, obviously with Maisie Williams' character in this, she sort of uses her nature as a storyteller to help beat these aliens, and it just reminded me of the Doctor's line to the Fisher King, "This is where your story ends." Just that word choice, I don't like to think that that's coincidental. I'm wondering if that whole notion of stories and the power of stories ending, stories beginning, is going to be something that we see throughout the series. I kind of hope so. I'm a sucker for stories about stories. But in any case, whatever your thoughts were on any of this, drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. Until next time, this council is adjourned.